we're interpreting the statutory phrase, a well-justified fear of persecution, we should try to do that in an even-handed way?
I think we should try to do that in the interest of the national security of the United States.
So okay, I agree with you too. We should. Should we try to do it in an even-handed way? So for example, should we say, if you're persecuted on the grounds of your religion, we'll let you in if you're a Christian, but not if you're a Muslim?
I think that the United States has a right to allow into this country and prioritize allowance of who they want to allow to come in.
But
I'm going
to ask you, what?
Yeah.
So a well-justified fear of persecution?
Yeah, they thought that their farms were being burned down and they would be killed. I think that's a pretty good justification for wanting to come. They're afraid for their lives.
And should it be applied in an even-handed way? That's an easy.
No, our foreign policy doesn't require even-handedness. It requires prioritizing the interests of the United States.
The phrase says you are entitled to entrance as a refugee if you demonstrate a well-justified fear of persecution.
No, you're not entitled.
So
you're
can
allowed.
You have a different standard based upon the color of somebody's skin? Would that be acceptable?
Well, I'm not the one arguing that. Apparently you are, because you don't like the fact that they're white, and that's why they're coming.
I'm just asking you to say that would be unacceptable.
Well, no,
that
I would say that the United States...
a very easy thing to say.
The United States has a right to pick and choose who they allow into the United States.
Even based on the color of somebody's skin.
You're the one that's talking about the color of their skin, not me. These
are
people whose farms were being burned down and they were killed because of the color of their skin.
Well,
Thank you. Senator Kaine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. In response to an earlier question, you sort of posed a question back. What is one thing that has happened during the Trump administration that has strengthened Vladimir Putin's hand in Ukraine, mentioning that the sanctions were still in place? I just would like to introduce for the record an article dated February 28 from NBC News titled, State Department Terminates U.S. Support of Ukraine Energy Grid Restoration.
That'll be entered in the record.
I was in Ukraine the day after the Palm Sunday bombing in Sumy and spoke to USAID staffers who'd all been riffed. They're going to be laid off either in the middle of the summer or early September. I'm aware that that's subject to litigation, but they talked about the fact that the grant cancellation canceled a grant that USAID had in place, hundreds of millions of dollars, that has been used repeatedly to restore the Ukrainian energy grid after attacks by Russians. I could give other examples. That is the one that is most present on my mind since I was just there. Mr. Secretary, I want to ask you about the program. It's the United States Refugee Assistance Program, and this is a program that state is the manager of, but together with other cabinet secretariats, DHS and HHS. State plays the lead management role, and it is how to manage the U.S. refugee assistance programs in tandem with contractors who help the United States on that. By an executive order on the first day of his presidency, President Trump paused all refugee programs and has canceled contracts to the agencies like the U.S. Catholic Church or Lutheran Refugee Services or HIAS or Church World Services who've been resettling refugees. Those programs are paused. There's litigation about it, but as far as I know, the United States is not, or the administration has not withdrawn the executive order. So there's essentially from this administration no refugee programs for anyone except. In early February, the president announced a special refugee program for Afrikaner farmers, justified A, by some concerns about South African foreign policy, but B, a claim that these were persecuted individuals. So right now, the U.S. Refugee Program allows a special program for Afrikaner farmers, the first group of whom arrived at Dulles Airport in Virginia not long ago, while shutting off the refugee program for everyone else. Do you think Afrikaner farmers are the most persecuted group in the world?
I think those 49 people that came certainly felt they were persecuted, and they've passed every sort of check mark that had to be checked off in terms of meeting the requirements for that. They live in a country where farms are taken and land is taken on a racial basis.
Okay. Do you think they're more persecuted than Uyghurs or Rohingyas, or more persecuted than political dissidents in Cuba or Venezuela or Nicaragua, or more persecuted than those who would be threatened should they be returned to Afghanistan by violence by the Taliban?
Well, the problem we face there is the volume problem, okay? If you look at all the persecuted people of the world, it's millions of people. They can't all come here. and we had refugee programs
So
that were
why,
acting
so why,
as a magnet for
why
people to come here.
prioritize Afrikaner farmers above
Well, because
all
it's a
of them?
small subset, it's a new issue, and the president identified it as a problem and wanted to use it as an example. But that's different from having these refugee programs that were basically spending money to put people up in communities and accommodate them, and it was acting as a magnet. Millions of people entered this country illegally, and today the border is sealed.
Let me challenge you, and I'm just going to say for the public, if you want to understand about the, quote, persecution of Afrikaner farmers, go look at the composition of the South African government. Since July of 2024, there's a government of national unity, and the opposition party to the ANC, the Afrikaner Party, the Democracy Alliance, is part of the governing coalition. They joined the governing coalition a year ago, and the leader of that party was given the remit of Agriculture Minister, John Steenhuisen. He is the leader of the former Afrikaner Party, still widely representing Afrikaners. He is the Minister of Agriculture in South Africa right now. I assert that this claim that there's persecution of Afrikaner farmers is completely specious. Are you aware ever during the apartheid era in South Africa did the United States establish a special program to allow South African blacks who were treated as second-class citizens in the apartheid program, a special program so they could claim refugee status in the United States?
No, because I was probably in 9th grade or 8th grade at the time.
Well, then I don't expect you to know. I'll just tell you, never has there been a program, a special program for Africans to come in as refugees to the United States. We've allowed special programs for people being persecuted for their religion, Soviet-era Jews. We've allowed special programs for people fleeing from communism, Cuba, Vietnam, the Soviet Union. We've never allowed a special program to allow Africans into the United States in an expedited refugee status until now. Afrikaner farmers living in a nation governed by a government of national unity that includes the main Afrikaner Party. And actually, an even more right-wing Afrikaner Party is also included in the coalition government. Now, would you agree with me, Mr. Secretary, that if we're interpreting the statutory phrase, a well-justified fear of persecution, we should try to do that in an even-handed way?
I think we should try to do that in the interest of the national security of the United States.
So okay, I agree with you too. We should. Should we try to do it in an even-handed way? So, for example, should we say, if you're persecuted on the grounds of your religion, we'll let you in if you're a Christian, but not if you're a Muslim?
I think that the United States has a right to allow into this country and prioritize allowance of who they want to allow to come in.
But
I think there's
but I'm going to ask you, what? Yeah. So a well-justified fear of persecution?
Yeah, they thought that their farms were being burned down and they would be killed. I think that's a pretty good justification for wanting to come. They're afraid for their lives.
And should it be applied in an even-handed way? That's an easy.
No, our foreign policy doesn't require even-handedness. It requires prioritizing the interests of the United States.
The statutory phrase says you are entitled to entrance as a refugee if you demonstrate a well-justified fear of persecution.
No, you're not entitled.
So can you have a different standard based upon the color of somebody's skin? Would that be acceptable?
Well, I'm not the one arguing that. Apparently you are, because you don't like the fact that they're white, and that's why they're coming.
I'm just asking you to say that would be unacceptable.
Well, no, I would say that the United States,
a very easy thing to say.
The United States has a right to pick and choose who they allow into the United States.
Even based on the color of somebody's skin.
You're the one that's talking about the color of their skin, not me. These
are
people whose farms were being burned down and they were killed because of the color of their skin. Well, you've demonstrated enough because you think anyone should be allowed into this country for any reason because they met a certain criteria.
Who has said that?
We are going to prioritize people that come into our country on the basis of what's in the interest of this country. That's a small number of people that are coming.
But you said this weekend that
there
would be more.
But in other cases, it's harder to vet. In other cases, it's more difficult. And by the way, the United States admits people every year. 1 million people come to this country every year legally. 1 million
and
people
now
a year come to this country legally.
There is one group of people that have an easy pass into this country. For the first time, this administration has said Afrikaners get an easy pass and refugee programs for the remainder of the world are shut off. And you can't say to the American public that we should apply this statute in an even-handed way.
No, I think it should be applied in a way. No, well, you shouldn't be shocked. It should be applied in the national interest of the United States. Our immigration policy should be based on the national interest of the United States, period. End of story. If there is a subset of people that are easier to vet, who we have a better understanding of who they are and what they're going to do when they come here, they're going to receive preference, no doubt about it. There are a lot of sad stories around the world, millions and millions of people around the world. It's heartbreaking. We cannot assume millions and millions of people around the world. No country can. So you have to have a process of deciding who do you prioritize, who do you allow in. We do it all the time. We do it in our immigration system now under our current laws. Unfortunately, it's primarily based on family connection and not on what they're going to contribute to the society from a merit standpoint. That should be changed, but that'll require statutory changes. But the bottom line is this notion that somehow we have to accept anyone who wants to come to the United States is absurd. No country in the world has an immigration policy like that.
And no one is arguing that we should. I yield back, Mr. Chair.
All right, let's step directly into the crosshairs of this Senate Foreign Relations Committee hearing, because we are watching a foundational, tectonic shift in how the United States defines its moral and legal obligations to the rest of the world. This isn't a routine bureaucratic briefing on embassy security or diplomatic visa processing times occurring here in May of 2026. This is an un-sanitized, high-stakes philosophical war over who gets a golden ticket into America, and whether the rule of law applies equally to all human beings or functions simply as an instrument of pure, transactional executive whim. To understand the immense friction vibrating through this room, look at the two intellectual heavyweights squaring off. On one side, you have Senator Tim Kaine of Virginia, a classic, process-oriented institutionalist, former civil rights attorney, and deep student of international statutes. Kaine approaches this hearing with forensic, systematic intent to expose what he views as a hypocritical, race-based distortion of federal law. On the other side, at the witness table, sits Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Rubio is a seasoned, hyper-articulate political operator who has completely leaned into the America First executive playbook. He isn't there to apologize or hide behind standard diplomatic vagueness. He is there to explicitly validate a cold, transactional, nationalist doctrine of foreign policy. This is a head-on collision between statutory egalitarianism and selective executive nationalism. Let's break down Kaine's opening offensive line, because he begins by laying a devastating paper trail onto the record. He introduces an NBC News article revealing a bombshell. The State Department has actively terminated U.S. support for the restoration of Ukraine's bombed energy grid. Kaine notes he was just on the ground in Ukraine, meeting with USAID workers who have been laid off because hundreds of millions of dollars in emergency infrastructure grants were summarily canceled by the administration. This sets a chilling diagnostic baseline for the hearing. The administration is actively backing away from traditional Democratic allies under fire. But then, Kaine pivots directly into his main target, the United States Refugee Admissions Program, USRAP. He notes that on day one of the presidency, an executive order paused all standard refugee resettlement operations across the globe, ripping up long-standing contracts with trusted humanitarian groups like the Catholic Church, Lutheran Refugee Services, and HIS. But here is the massive, unsanitized anomaly Kaine drags into the light. While closing the door to millions of persecuted people worldwide, the president carved out one highly specific, exclusive exception in February, a special refugee pipeline specifically for Afrikaner farmers from South Africa. Kaine notes that the very first group of 49 white South African farmers just touched down at Dulles International Airport in Virginia. Watch the trap Kaine springs at the 2-minute mark. He looks at Rubio and asks point-blank, do you think Afrikaner farmers are the most persecuted group in the world? He lines them up against the world's most horrific humanitarian crises, asking if these 49 individuals are somehow facing greater persecution than the Uyghurs enduring genocide in China, the Rohingyas slaughtered in Myanmar, political dissidents being tortured in Cuba and Venezuela, or Afghan allies fleeing targeted execution by the Taliban. Look at the extraordinary defense Rubio mounts. It is a textbook masterclass in nationalist triage. Rubio completely sidesteps the moral comparison by throwing up a structural roadblock, volume. He tells Kaine flatly that the world has millions of persecuted people, and America cannot take them all. He argues that the administration intentionally prioritized the Afrikaner farmers precisely because they are a small, isolated subset. Rubio claims it was used as a deliberate example to stop the refugee program from acting as a magnet that brings millions of people to the country. This is where Kaine completely dismantles the administration's factual narrative with an advanced seminar on modern geopolitics. He tells the public that if they want to understand the reality of South Africa, they need to stop looking at internet rumors and look at the actual composition of the South African government. He points out that since July of 2024, South Africa has been governed by a cross-racial government of national unity. The Democratic Alliance, the primary political party representing white Afrikaners, joined the governing coalition. More devastatingly, Kaine reveals that John Steenhuisen, the literal leader of that Afrikaner-backed party, is the sitting, active Minister of Agriculture in South Africa right now. Kaine barks out the un-sanitized truth. The claim that Afrikaner farmers are facing state-sponsored, systemic persecution is completely specious. Kaine then drops a historical hammer, forcing Rubio to admit that never once during the entire brutal era of apartheid did the United States establish an expedited, special refugee program to rescue black South Africans who were legally treated as second-class citizens by a white minority government. Kaine lists the historical exceptions America has made: Soviet Jews fleeing religious persecution, or individuals fleeing communist regimes in Cuba and Vietnam. He underscores the unprecedented nature of this moment. The administration has shut down the entire world's refugee apparatus while giving an exclusive easy pass to white farmers whose own political party runs the agricultural ministry of their home country. The friction in the room hits absolute boiling point at the 6-minute mark when Kaine demands an answer to a simple ethical and legal diagnostic test. When interpreting the statutory phrase, a well-justified fear of persecution, should the United States apply the law in an even-handed way? Should we tell a Christian they can enter, but a Muslim they cannot? Rubio's response is a breathtaking, unsanitized rejection of post-World War II international norms. He looks right at Kaine and says, our foreign policy doesn't require even-handedness. He asserts that the United States has the absolute, unreviewable sovereign right to pick and choose whoever it wants based entirely on national self-interest. When Kaine directly challenges him on whether it is acceptable to have a different standard based entirely on the color of a human being's skin, Rubio aggressively turns the tables, accusing Kaine of being the one obsessed with race. You don't like the fact that they're white, and that's why you're going to say that these people's farms were being burned down, and they were killed because of the color of their skin. Rubio hammers home his final, uncompromising thesis. American immigration policy should be based solely on merit, ease of vetting, and national interest. Period. End of story. He declares that if a specific group of people is easier to vet and has a clearer path to assimilation, they will receive absolute preference, calling the notion that America must apply asylum laws evenly to anyone who wants to come absurd. When you step back and watch this entire 8-minute warfare unfold, don't just see it as a typical partisan shouting match. This is a profound and deeply chilling window into a total systemic overhaul. It reveals an institutional reality where the historic, statutory framework of human rights and equal protection under international law is being systematically replaced by an executive doctrine of selective, politicized, and demographic favoritism, leaving the very concept of blind, even-handed justice completely shredded on the committee floor.